sorrow I feel.
The National Endowment for the Arts, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Luester T. Mertz Charitable Trust, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by viewers like you. The Lila Wallace Reader's Digest Fund, and by the following.
Paper moon hanging over a cardboard sea. How they wouldn't be make believe that you believe in me.
They were the breakthrough successes, the growing number of African American artists who became stars on Broadway, on network television, in Hollywood, reaching and thrilling mainstream America. Actor Sidney Poitier was a performer for 17 years before starring in the 1963 film Lilies of the Field.
The winner is Sidney Poitier.
The Academy Award he won was the first given to a black actor in a leading role in the Academy's 36-year history.
Clap your hands just a little bit louder. Clap your hands just a little bit louder.
In music, African American artists reached new heights, fueled by the emergence of black-owned recording companies like Motown Records. Conquering the pop charts with a string of #1 hit singles in the 1960s, Motown and its founder, Berry Gordy, created new sounds for a changing America. These were America's civil rights years. The nonviolent movement for racial equality, led by Dr. Martin Luther King, had been making steady gains. It was a turning point for the nation and a time of upheaval for many of its artists. In New York City, a group of visual artists began meeting to consider their responsibility to the movement and their relationship as black artists to the mainstream. They called themselves Spiral.
They were trying to define what is black art. And was there a black art? And if there was, what was it? And so each one of them in their own way, Norman Lewis in his way, Romare Bearden in his way, were pursuing black imagery so as to make this revelation. And out of it came Bearden's collages.
Romare Bearden was one of Spiral's most commercially successful members. He had moved through the social realism of the 1930s into the abstract expressionism of the 1950s. Bearden proposed collage as a group effort for Spiral. When other members weren't interested, he began to experiment on his own, cutting and pasting images, photographing and enlarging them, working in black and white.
It's a very interesting process because it combines a real intimacy with the subject matter and this kind of feeling of journalism that somebody has witnessed something and has been there on the scene. So you would see a street scene where people would be just sort of hanging out, but if you looked at it closely, you would see a kind of beauty and rhythm in their lives. He would jam faces up into the picture plane. He would distort faces. So you have this feeling that things were all being redefined, rethought.
focus on the vibrant life and culture of black neighborhoods reflected questions African Americans were raising about the goal of integration.
The biggest problem with integration was that it was accepting a white value system. It was accepting a system of white aesthetics. It was essentially saying, okay, as a black person, what you did was you made yourself into a white person. You melded in with these white people. The other thing was that it totally devalued what you were or what you were bringing to the mix or how you had sort of created yourself in some way. So what people had become very interested in was, in fact, self-creation and self-formation.
The Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches us that it is time for you and me to stand up for ourselves. It is time for you and me to see for ourselves. It is time for you and me to hear for ourselves. And it is time for you and me to fight for ourselves.
Suddenly there were people like Malcolm who were speaking more directly to the issue, who rejected, the Martin Luther King nonviolence thing. We said we had never been violent. And the problem was not us. The problem was with white people. They're the ones, the violent ones. But we're not going to be passive if they attack us.
3-button suit. What right do you have to be wearing a 3-button suit and a striped tie? Your grandfather was a slave. He didn't go to Harvard.
My grandfather was a night watchman.
You went to a colored college where everybody thought they were Averil Harriman.
Yeah. All except me.
Who'd you think you were? Who do you think you are now?
Malcolm's address to black people, that he spoke freely and truthfully and fearlessly, that's what impressed me.
After Malcolm's death, Leroy Jones sent letters to writers, painters, artists to come to do work with the community, to do work with each other, to bring people, to take up, to pick up, to continue Malcolm's work.
Calling all black people, man, woman, child, wherever you are, calling you urgent. Come in, black people, come in, wherever you are, urgent. Calling you, calling all black people, come in. Black people, come on in.
And the musicians came, and the painters came, and the writers came, and the singers came, and you had lines outside the brownstone all the way to the corner.
Across the nation, artists launched what became known as the Black Arts Movement. In schools, theaters, and parks, they struggled to define an aesthetic that was community-based and uniquely African American.
When it hit in '65 onward, it hit with explosions all over the country. So you just cannot say it was New York or Chicago or Detroit or New Orleans or Atlanta or San Francisco or Los Angeles. Simultaneously, brothers and sisters were just hitting all the time in all these different areas.
The whole concept of the arts movement, the whole definition of the art really was an African concept. The art should be functional. You don't carve to carve, you carve a chair, you carve a spoon, you carve something that's usable, right? And you make that beautiful.
All the poets and all the artists had to come by, how does this contribute to the liberation of black people? How does this contribute to black power? How does this contribute to us moving forward as collectively, as a people? If it didn't contribute in any way, then it wasn't black art. It was something else.
In Chicago, America's preeminent black poet, 50-year-old Gwendolyn Brooks, was enjoying the rewards of a writing career that began when she was just 13 years old. In 1950, Brooks had been the first African American to win the Pulitzer Prize, awarded for her poetry collection, Annie Allen.
My poetry has often been called Negro poetry, and I am considered a Negro poet. It's true that I am a Negro. hope I am a poet. But when I begin to write a poem, I don't have social classifications in mind. I'm impelled by an emotion or a thought.
A member of America's literary elite, Brooks lectured frequently at universities and published with Harper and Row, one of the nation's largest and oldest presses. Her readers were predominantly white.
I had always been writing poems that made people in my audiences say after the reading, "Why are you so bitter?" So you can imagine what kinds of poems those were.
Drive him past the pool hall, drive him past the show, blind within his casket, but maybe he will know. Down through 47th Street, underneath the L, and Northwest Corner Prairie that he loved so well. Don't forget the dance halls, Warwick and Savoy, where he picked his women, where he drank his liquid joy. Born in Alabama, bred in Illinois, he was nothing but a plain black boy. Swing low, sweet, sweet chariot, nothing but a plain black boy.
You know, I once wrote a bad review about Gwen's poetry, and what I had reacted to was the sense of being restricted in the language of many of, you know, the poets of Gwen. I thought there was a restriction. I thought there was a kind of a fail, if not a failure, a kind of limit to what they would say or what they could see, let's see, or what their perception of. It didn't seem to me that they were angry enough at this particular system.
In the spring of 1967, Amiri Baraka was scheduled to address a conference of black writers at Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee. Gwendolyn Brooks was also on the program.
And I had just come from South Dakota State College, and it was very, very, very white out there, I've said before. But here we came to this utterly black scene. Young black writers were walking around erect instead of slumped over. And they seemed so proud of themselves.
From the podium, Brooks read a prose poem, The Life of Lincoln West, about a little boy coming to terms with his identity.
Response to the other poets was, you would shout back, right on and blah, 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 blah. With her, it was really listening and savoring these words, right, and this effect. But it was still an expectancy in the house because we expected to hear Baraka.
When Baraka arrived, he arrived to hear me read. And I announced that he had come, and the audience just went wild.
Baraka was emerging as a dynamic and outspoken leader of the black arts movement.
Come out, niggas, 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 come out. Help us stop the devil. Help us build a new world, niggas. Come out, brothers. Are we with you and your sons, your daughters are ours, and we are the same, all the blackness from one black Allah. When the world is clear, you'll be with us. Come out, niggas, come out. Come out, niggas, come out. It's nation time. It's nation time. It's nation time. It's nation time. Chant with bells and drums. Nation time, it's nation time. Get up, Santa Claus, get up. Roy Wilkins, get up. Dinah Ross, get up. Jimmy Brown, it's nation time. Build it, get up. Muppet Bagger, get up. Now it's for real. But I'm Master Ferrari. Last Jewel. Get up, nigga. Get up, nigga. Come over here, nigga. Take a bow, nigga. It's nation time. Hey!
I felt that something new was happening, and when I went home, it was to find a telegram from Oscar Brown Jr. He wanted me to come to a rehearsal of his new musical, Opportunity Please Knock, it was called. And he had invested the talents of such people as, well, Blackstone Rangers were among the stars.
Brown had formed an unlikely alliance with members of the Blackstone Rangers, Chicago's largest and most violent youth gang.
Don't beat down my door because I could not stand the shock. Opportunity. I taught Opportunity Please Knock to 5 youngsters in this group and to the band. They created an arrangement, including the background vocals, which they called the blow. And so they would make the lead thing and the blow. And ooh, knock, knock. That was their addition. Ooh, knock, knock. Ooh, knock, knock.
I was just stunned at what those young people could do when someone took the time to help them, such as Oscar Brown, Jr. And I asked him, weren't there some writers among those singers and dancers?
Brooks created a writing workshop for the gang members, which quickly attracted other promising black writers. A group of these young people began to meet regularly at Brooks' tiny book-filled home on Chicago's South Side.
Hakeem Adabuti, Sonia Sanchez, Jahari Amini, Nikki Giovanni a couple of times would all come over and talk about the state of black people, what we had to do. And so there was still a lot of talk about literature, and people would read their poetry and whatever else they were writing.
Gwendolyn Brooks was challenged, not only in terms of the craft, but also challenged in terms of language. And there was always really big battles over this language, you know, especially use of profanity in the poetry. I remember one time we fought. I mean, everybody was there, but it was between Gwendolyn Brooks and myself. And I just jumped up and said, F this and forget, I'm gone, you know. And I stayed away for about 2 weeks, and we finally came back together and hugged each other and said, you know, we really are family.
Once Carolyn Rogers talked about trees, and she would say she didn't see why she couldn't mention a tree in her poem. See, there was to be no frippery in the new expression. So, people just got up and screamed. Val Gray Ward was there visiting, and she jumped up, and I cannot tell you what she said because we are on polite TV. But it started with a B. She was so angry that Carolyn wanted to write about trees.
She had accepted many of our ideas. She was reading the literature that we had suggested that she read, and all this had a profound effect upon her. And one evening, she just came out, and her hair was not straight anymore. And people just smiled.
It's interesting that none among my new friends urged me to get a natural. They just were nice enough to accept me as I was with my straightened hair. But suddenly I said to myself, I want to look like them. I want to be natural. I love that word, natural.
The changes in Brooks' outlook were reflected in the manuscript she submitted to Harper & Row in the fall of 1967.
Everybody knew that poetry was not a profit-making venture, but every 2 or 3 years there'd be a Gwendolyn Brooks book. You know, there were a lot of debates at editorial conferences about other books of poetry, but nobody ever argued about Gwendolyn Brooks. If her books came in, they were published.
The title poem, In the Mecca, used a series of vignettes to tell the story of a child's murder in a notorious Chicago slum building. After Mecca included 11 newer poems, including pieces on Malcom X, black art, and the Blackstone Rangers.
In the Mecca was quite inflammatory for Harper's in those days. I mean, it was, it told it like it was, right?
Brooks ended the collection with 2 pieces, both called Sermon on the War Plant.
It is a speech by a preacher of blackness, bringing his or her flock to come together around the joys and the pains of being black in the society or in many societies around the world.
The fact that we are black is our ultimate reality. And several strengths from drowsiness campaigned, but spoke in single sermon on the warpland, and went about the warpland saying, no, my people, black and black, revile the river, say that the river turns, and turn the river.
Sermon on the Warpland really makes a major statement in the change that my mother made from pre-67 to post-67. So she did a lot less rhyme after that, virtually none. And she says in many things, she's quoted as saying that this is not a rhyme time.
Harper and Row printed 4,000 copies of In the Mecca, and nearly 3,000 sold within the first week of its release. Some critics praised Brooks' new militancy. Others thought that her poetry had suffered.
In the Mecca specifically has some fierceness that has been criticized. If you're fierce, you will be criticized.
I just freaking to walk out the door when a special bulletin flashed on the television that Dr. King had been shot. And then a little while later, they said Dr. King was dead. My anger was that of any other black person anywhere in the United States.
In city after city across the nation, news of Martin Luther King's death sparked outrage and violence. 39 people died in riots that lasted 7 days and caused more than $45 million in damages. Hardest hit were Washington, D.C., Pittsburgh, and Chicago.
When King was assassinated, the city exploded. And we younger writers saw ourselves as being a part of the mass of people out here in the streets. We felt that we didn't have a lot of time. And so the writing was at a level of urgency.
For a while, progress was made, along with a certain degree of happiness, because I wrote a book and found a love and began to believe all good people could get together and win without bloodshed. Then Hammarskjöld was killed, and Lumumba was killed, and Diem was killed, and Kennedy was killed, and Malcolm was killed, and Evers was killed, and Swerner, Cheney, and Goodman were killed, and Louisio was killed, and Stokely fled the country, and Leroy was arrested, and Rapp was arrested, and Pollard, Thompson, and Cooper were killed, and King was killed, and Kennedy was killed. And sometimes I wonder why I didn't become a debutante, sitting on doctors' porches, going to church all the time, wondering, is my eye makeup on straight? Or withdrawn, discoursing on the stars and the moon, instead of a for real black person who must now feel and inflict pain.
Brooks responded to the uprisings with a poem she called Riot. She submitted it to Dudley Randall, the founder and editor of Broadside Press in Detroit. Broadside was one of only 4 black-owned publishing companies in the nation.
Well, I had been telling a lot of young people to give their poems to Broadside Press. But here I was, as I've said before, safely in the harbor. And yet I was giving them this advice. It didn't seem right.
Many of the young writers in Brooks' workshop published with Broadside Press. In 1970, 53-year-old Gwendolyn Brooks joined them. Ending her long-term relationship with Harper and Row, she offered Broadside her autobiography, Report from Part 1.
The decision was that she was going to write for and directly to black folks. She was not really caring about what white folks said about her work, whether they read it or not. Her primary interest was black people.
And we all looked up and said, what a commitment. What a fantastic, loving commitment. Because you see, she just did not bring a book. She brought her name, her history, a following. She brought money to that company, of course, because she's saying, well, I'm now giving you my name, Broadside Press. Use it wisely, use it well.
Suppose I had not met those young people in the spring of 1967, or hadn't had something like that happen to me later on. I don't know just what it might have been. Well, I would have been inadequate, incomplete. But after that, I said to myself, I hope that what I've written here or am writing here will be of some assistance.
The Black Arts Movement brought new energy and new challenges to African American artists struggling for recognition.
Now we could paint Black life in a political context that was particularly out of our own experience and out of our own philosophy of who and what we were, based on the writings of Baraka and Baldwin, and coming at it in a fresh, new, and exciting way, with no holds barred.
I noticed around 64, 65 that my gallery was not showing the African-American images I was doing, because I was doing both white and Black images. But as soon as the Black awareness thing came in with afros and Black is beautiful, everything, then the only thing the galleries wanted to show was Black images. I used to kid and say, don't worry about it. The other race is down in my studio. I can't get them to show.
With the opening of the Studio Museum in Harlem, founded to showcase African American art, Black artists gained a new venue. But the definition of Black art remained controversial.
I had moved from figurative painting to abstract painting, basically spraying little dots of color, onto really basically as a field of color on a large canvas. And I remember taking my work up to the Studio Museum, and didactic narrative art was appreciated a bit more by the museum, and I was basically told, in quotes, to go downtown and show with the white boys. And I was really discouraged by that, because I felt at that point, my work was very, much from the heart. But at the time, I really wanted to show in Harlem first.
Downtown, the Whitney Museum, world-renowned for its collection of American art, opened a show presenting work from the 1930s. During the 30s, government support created unprecedented opportunities for artists, Black as well as white. Yet of the 80 artists included in the Whitney show, none was African American.
In presenting a period where Black artists were active and were part of the exhibiting scene, to eliminate them was really to distort history, because they were there. And so when you take them out and show and say, this is the way the 30s look, it's a distortion.
In protest, curator Henri Ghent and a group of artists organized a counter-exhibit called Invisible Americans. Works by more than 20 Black artists active in the 1930s were included in the show, which opened at the Studio Museum in November 1968. Some artists also argued for more direct action.
What we really need to do, is to have a demonstration. And some people got ready for that, and some people were not quite so ready for that. However, it did occur, because demonstration was what was going on. Everybody was demonstrating.
On a rainy Sunday afternoon, nearly 30 artists picketed the Whitney and the show's curator, Bill Agee. 2 months later, many of the same artists were picketing again, this time outside the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The Met, which boasted the nation's largest and most comprehensive collection of world art, had just opened Harlem on My Mind. the popular and highly controversial audio-visual exhibit featured some 1,200 photographs of life in Harlem. Protesters accused the Met of treating Black Americans as subjects while ignoring the art of Black painters and sculptors.
We pointed out it looked like an exposition that should take place at the Civic Center or something. It didn't look like it should take place in a museum. And so the day that we started picketing, the Met personnel, with all their noses pressed to the glass of the front doors, looked out at us in total amazement. And here we were, about 13 African-American artists, walking around and around, and the police were there to greet us with the sergeants from the police department, and no one could believe us. People driving up and down Fifth Avenue wondered what was going on.
The demonstrators organized the Black Emergency Cultural Coalition to negotiate on behalf of Black artists for better representation at museums throughout the city.
While we felt good about picketing the Met, we realized that the museum that we really should concentrate on was the one that called itself the Museum of American Art. So the coalition designated 4 of us to be the spokespersons to go to the Whitney and engage them. And at the very beginning, the negotiation went along pretty smoothly.
The director at that time, whose name was Jack Bauer, I think he was altogether sympathetic. I think it's a combination of, Anglo guilt and not knowing really how to rectify a situation that was, after all, much bigger than simply the protest. But he definitely was open to doing something, and I know that he engaged in a series of dialogues with people like, I know Benny Andrews was one of the artists that he was talking to.
This group made a large issue about the inclusion of Black artists by constant raising of the question, why aren't we there? Why is this work only discussed as if it's all social work and no other work? A whole series of questions that tried to have the impact of forcing curators and museum professionals to look at the work of Black Americans and to see it as art.
After months of discussion, the Whitney agreed to mount a major exhibition of works by contemporary Black artists. As curator Robert Doty began contacting artists and selecting work to include, coalition members denounced him for not sufficiently consulting with African American art experts.
I went down the next day after the exhibition had opened, and several of the African American artists that were in the exhibition said they were going to take their work out. And I was one that was really so touching. The man was crying. I don't want to call his name, but he was crying, and he said, you know, I'm so torn. He said, now I realize I should not be in that exhibition. And he said, I was home with my wife, and she told me not to come back unless I go get my pain. All of us are struggling so hard to be in museums, and of course the Whitney is, one of the museums that we will all want to be in.
I made a decision, I will be in the show. I saw how few women had a chance. I basically had joined a women's co-op, and if you can imagine it being bad for white women, it was certainly bad for us. And I just felt this is one of the few opportunities that I'll have.
Walking through that show, what I do remember is that it looked pretty much like any other exhibition that the Whitney would put on, which kind of proved the point that people had been left out or neglected or eliminated, written out of art history for no reason that was artistic, at any rate, because the range of work in that show was a very broad range of work.
Some members of the coalition felt that the show overemphasized abstract art.
In the exhibition, they gave huge spaces to the artists that worked abstractly. I mean, their space was just totally out of proportion. And then inside, in a little box, a little room made up, you had the African-American artists who worked realistically, like Jake Lawrence and Vincent Smith and people like that, who had African-American imagery. And so that was the example of what they did to try to counteract our argument that your personal existence, your experiences and things did have something to do with your artwork. And we wanted to project more than just one kind of art. We wanted to show the total dimension of the African-American experience.
For coalition members, a more important showcase of black art had opened nearby at the Museum of Modern Art. In March 1971, the museum opened 2 solo shows, each a major retrospective of work by an African American artist. Richard Hunt, a 35-year-old sculptor from Chicago, presented art created over the past 15 years, much of it abstract. 59-year-old Romare Bearden showed a range of work spanning 3 decades, including the collages and paintings that explored the rituals of African American life.
That was a wonderful thing for us because the exhibition was curated on the highest level. And it was a wonderful way to look at an artist who had developed from one style to another. And that was the kind of thing we had been asking for.
It was one of the very few times that I could see black life presented in all this richness and fullness and yet not be sentimental. And I think this is one of the things that I valued and appreciated most, was its lack of sentimentality and this bold and affirmative grace. And I thought, boy, if I could make my plays the equal of this in terms of the way that it explores black life, then I'll take that, you know, and that's what I strive to do.
Black Americans have been insisting on their identity ever since the 60s in a militant way. And I think that idea that your heritage is something that you can mine, that you can dig in, that you can build yourself out of, is an idea that we have really brought to the forefront of American art.
My old man came in last week saying, "Shut up, woman. You know I was high. You might as well go on and forgive me, pretty mama, 'cause I'm sorry."
In 1976, Broadway audiences were electrified by For Colored Girls Who Have Considered Suicide When the Rainbow Is Enough, the work of 27-year-old poet and playwright Ntozake Shange. Using music, poetry, and dance, Shange recounted the sufferings and joys of young black women.
And I was like, wow. I get there, and there are all these colored people, especially colored women, with shopping bags, okay? You know what I mean? And broken down ankles and standing in line on the street to go see this thing by this woman whose name they could not pronounce. And I said, wow, there's something going on, okay?
I want you to know that this has been an experiment to see how selfish I could be. If I could really carry on to snare a possible lover. If I was capable of debasing myself for the love of another. If I could stand not being wanted when I wanted to be wanted.
So for a little while, and then they stopped, put skids on, and said, to hell with that. We were bought or sold together on the African continent. We lay spoon fashion in the filthy hatches of slave ships together. We got up and stood on the auction block together. We were bought again together. Got up before sunrise, slept after sunset together. Took the lash together, no jack.
In unprecedented numbers and with new force, black women playwrights, poets, novelists, and essayists began to make themselves heard.
This is a poem that I wrote during the 60s when the Black Revolution was just always upon us and with us, and sometimes in not a very pleasant way, because we were often, and those of us who were writing poems were often told what kinds of poems we could write, you know. And so I decided that to hell with all the stuff that you want me to write. I'm going to write about what I know, and I'm going to write about the people I care about. And so this is called In These Dissenting Times. And it's sort of a manifesto, or a womanifesto. In these dissenting times, I shall write of the old men I knew and the young men I loved, and of the gold-toothed women, mighty of arm, who dragged us all to church.
In 1977, 33-year-old Alice Walker was living in New York City, working as an editor at Ms. Magazine. Walker had published 2 novels about the exploitation and suffering of black women. Now she was contemplating a new book whose shape was sparked by a story her sister told her.
The story was that the wife of this man had asked the lover of this man for a pair of her panties, or as they used to call them, drawers. And this was so intriguing to me because it struck in me an interest in the kind of eroticism that people have, you know. And in this instance, it felt to me that there was a bond between the women, and then they each had a bond with the man. So it was a very bisexual story to me. I mean, it struck a very bisexual thing in my mind. So I thought about that. And that feeling, a lot of it went into creating this triangle, basically, that is between Celie and Mr. and Shug.
Walker began drawing on her family history to create Celie, a Southern woman in the early 1900s. Mr. was the man Celie was forced to marry. Shug was Mr.'s lover, and eventually Celie's.
Well, of course, she doesn't tell you when she's going to start writing a book. You know, she just does it. But she describes it as being pregnant and looking for a place to give birth.
My characters really detested New York. Their favorite expression, as I would struggle out of my bed in Brooklyn and go to Manhattan through the maze of skyscrapers, their favorite expression was, "What is this tall anyway?" I had to change my life completely. I was married, I got a divorce. I lived in New York. I had to move here to a tiny town in Mendocino called Boonville. And that's when I really settled in to write it.
Having carried the story in her head for several years, Walker wrote The Color Purple in just months. The novel tells the story of Celie's struggle toward independence after enduring a childhood and marriage in which she was beaten and raped.
Dear God, Harpo asked his daddy why he beat me. Mr. say, 'cause she my wife, plus she's stubborn. All women good for. He don't finish. He just took his chin over the paper like he do. Remind me of Pa. Harpo asked me, well, how come you stubborn? He don't ask, how come you his wife? Nobody asked that. I say, just born that way, I reckon. He beat me like he beat the children, except he don't never hardly beat them. He says, Celie, get the belt. The children be outside the room peeking through the cracks. It's all I can do not to cry. I make myself wood. I say to myself, Celie, you a tree. That's how come I know trees fear man.
I was on vacation, and I called her long distance to say, this is it. And she said, you think so? And I said, this one is it. And what I meant was, until that point, Alice was sort of known, sort of well known. So, but I said, this one It's going to throw you out there.
Walker's novel was published in June 1982.
My first reaction as I opened the book was, these are letters, and this is an epistolatory novel, and how is she going to pull this off? I mean, I can see she's facing some very difficult problems, violence, and relationships between men and women, and violence between men and women.
She raised some issues that I'm sure that some people did not want to even hear at that point. I remember as I was reading, I put the book down and thought to myself, do I really want to listen to these issues? And then I thought back to growing up in New York City and knowing that those things, those issues were very real issues in our black community, in the Harlem community. People were very quiet about it.
The Color Purple ignited a storm of both praise and outrage. Walker was accused of betraying the black community by presenting negative images of black families and attacking black men.
All the minority people are going through the same controversy. And what it is that we women writers are heavily criticized by male critics that we are not writing the correct story of our men. And not only do we deny them their manhood, but we are accusing them of beating us, not taking good care of us, of not being real men.
Now, when somebody pointed out to me, yeah, did you know all the men in that book are dogs and blah? Well, yeah, okay, you're probably right. But the book as bare bones attack on men was not my feeling about it when I had finished reading it.
In 1983, The Color Purple won the prestigious National Book Award and the Pulitzer Prize. It was rising steadily on bestseller lists when director Steven Spielberg and producer Quincy Jones approached Walker about turning it into a movie.
They came together to later I understood it as a pitch. I didn't know. I mean, I thought they were just coming, and so anyhow, they came and we talked about the book, and what impressed me was that they both really loved it, and they both really knew it very well, especially Stephen.
Stephen was nervous, very nervous, because Alice was very protective of that work, and I understand that, because it's her baby, and it was just an absolute masterpiece, and already won the Pulitzer Prize, and we met her that night. She was surprised that Stephen had done his homework that well, and we started.
I'm, this white Jewish director from California, and the book affected me very deeply. And I had to question that. I had to, at first, decide why was I affected by a book about a culture that I thought I didn't know very much about until I realized that I know a lot about people. And the book is about people.
Released just before Christmas, 1985, The Color Purple brought Walker's novel to an audience of millions and intensified the resentment of those who felt that her controversial portrayal of the black family was receiving undue mainstream attention.
Clean myself. Go on.
I'll just have to shave it off and start.
No. It's bad luck to cut a woman's hair.
That'll take all day.
Shut up!
I can't. It hurts her.
Don't talk back to me.
You do what I tell you.
The problem is that such a movie tends to create a stereotype in the other culture's mind about what kind of people we are. And in no way does that reflect the family relationships that I have ever known about or that I would ever think that could ever be imagined to be occurring in our families.
We don't think the movie served us at all. We don't think that most black women writers serve us at all. And we don't, and we think that the
50 years in this country, black women had to deal with reading novels in which they were accused of being the castrators of black men. 50 years of it.
Richard, I'm not here to argue with you.
Man, no. No one anymore takes these kind of positions, telling writers what they should write and how they should behave and what images they should be putting out there. Alice Walker wrote the truth. She wrote her truth.
Alice Walker has more to do than come back to another television show and be asked about the color purple and be accused of bashing black men. Here's what Tony Brown said on our show about your work.
I think Alice Walker has a right to write books. Steven Spielberg has a right to produce movies. And we who are offended have a right to protect and defend ourselves. So I think she is legitimate in what she's doing. But I think what she has done is she has done it at the expense of black people and of black men.
Did you do that, Ms. Walker? You agree?
One thing that has struck me over the years, listening to the criticism, is how in my novel, The Color Purple, the men become transformed. Mr. asks Celia to marry him again, and you know, they're friends. And yet these things, this kind of development on the part of men is never, ever noticed by anyone.
There were actually groups demonstrating for all kinds of reasons that she had used bad English, that she had used profanity, that she had showed a sexual relationship between two women, that, you know, so it was actually that just as much in the public sense as it was her portrayal of black men.
People reacted more to the movie than to the book. I teach the book each semester, and I think that once you read the book with any kind of sensitivity and understanding of the historical development, cultural development of black people in America, that you cannot really fault the book at any level. It's very insightful. She brought a character, Celia, into the world that was very complex and had these dual identities, and that hadn't needed to be spoken to at that time.
You know, he said, you look real good since you've been up in Memphis. Yeah, I say, Suge took good care of me. How you make your living up there, he say. Making pants, I say. He say, I noticed everybody in the family just about wearing pants you made. But you mean you turned it into a business? That's right, I say. But I really started it right here in your house to keep from killing you. He looked down at the floor. Suge helped me make the first pair I ever did, I say. And then, like a fool, I start to cry. I think that what the community learned was that in this instance, after all of this controversy, all of this time, they are left with a story that continues to move them. I mean, that continues to take them to the dark place, to take them to the scary place, but holds on to their hand while they're there, and then walks them back into the light, you know. And the light is actually their own love. It's their own love of who they really are. And so I think it has been a way of helping black people not to fear themselves. I mean, our task here in America has been to learn to want ourselves, no matter what other people are wanting. You know, I want me, you know?
African American artists provide the rhythms, visions, and poetry for a new millennium. When we return to I'll Make Me a World.